The Sega Genesis, or Sega Mega Drive if Phil Collins is coming at you with a tyre iron, represented the absolute peak of Sega as a console manufacturer. A more than worthy SNES rival, the Genesis packed countless incredible games into its hallowed run, which was somehow still going in Brazil up until just a few years ago. Whether you're a vulture like us or a pombo, it's time to look at 50 of the best Sega Genesis games of all time. Games based on the Wild West are a cheat code to make people say, "Hell yeah, brother," and one look at Sunset Riders should elicit that exact reaction. A western themed take on shoot 'em ups like Contra and others. It's not so much brother, but hell yeah, partner. It's high noon, so you know that it's time for some rootin', tootin', side-scrolling shooting. Tuberculosis. Sunset Riders allows players to pick from 2 bounty hunters to chase down gangs of outlaws across 8 different stages. Admittedly, it's a bit of a scaled down port of the original arcade version with 2 additional characters and half the levels removed, but the Genesis version did offer a versus mode if you felt like dueling your sibling, and you did. Arguably the most deeply unserious game ever made, James Bond 2 codename Robocod is about as ridiculous as it gets while still being a genuinely enjoyable platformer. It's also incredibly British, to the point where the UK release of the game included product placement for McVitie's Penguin Biscuits, so you know you're getting a game that's soaked in about 17 layers of irony. Following on from the 007 stand-up James Bond underwater agent, the sequel aims its sights squarely on Robocop for some reason, with James being given cybernetic armour that lets him stretch his torso indefinitely. Using that, James needs to rescue Santa from his workshop after the evil Dr. Maybe, first name Call Me, has taken him and the elves hostage. Completely ridiculous, but still worth playing. Altered Beast might be an example of a series that's got huge cultural recognition despite only having 3 games total. The name alone has been referenced tons in pop culture, and even just saying the phrase "rise from your grave" might be enough to induce PTSD in any old school gamer, but there's only been 3 games in total, and none in over 20 years. Might be the power of being a Genesis pack-in game, honestly. You probably know the deal already, but Altered Beast is the ancient Greece set beat-em-up where you control a dude who slowly transforms into a powerful man-creature hybrid throughout the level. It's basic, brutally hard, but still fun too. If nothing else, this is still miles better than the PS2 version. Not hard. Name the forgotten GBA Altered Beast game down in the comments and you could win a free Steam key for free. It's kind of amazing how the Madden games have become the gold standard for American football games, considering back when the series first started as John Madden Football, the NFL license was nowhere to be seen. After a few years of reinventing virtual gridiron for the masses though, introducing features unseen at the time like putting the camera behind the quarterback, NFL came knocking. Madden on the Genesis is a story of steadily escalating greatness, with each entry adding new features and abilities to build on what came before. With that in mind, consider Madden NFL 96, the last one in the series before it came to the PS1 and started taking even bigger leaps. Europeans, you can slam FIFA 95 in here instead if you like, even if it's not your favourite Metroidvania. The side-scrolling space shooter that now lives in infamy due to one badly translated opening cutscene, Zero Wing is more than just the "all your base all belong to us" line. Remember when that was all the internet was? Ugh, a simpler time. What makes Zero Wing a bit sadder though is that it's the last horizontal shoot-'em-up from Tower Plan, as apparently the devs just didn't believe they knew how to make one interesting. Don't be so hard on yourself, lads. This whips. Like all good horizontal space shmups, it's one ship versus an entire alien armada, but you've got some extra tools in your arsenal to turn the tides. Grabbing enemies, use them as shields against projectiles never gets old, and neither does this game. Say what you want about Michael Jackson, unless you're under an NDA, but he has a pretty cool legacy in video games. Cameo appearances in Space Channel 5 and Ready to Rumble Boxing, contributing to the music for Sonic 3, and who can forget Moonwalker, the tie-in to the movie of the same name. Now, we'll grant you that the Genesis version isn't quite as good as the arcade release, but there's a decent Shinobi homage hidden in here too. Based on the smooth criminal section of the film, Moonwalker sees MJ battling waves of Mr. Big's goons across 6 main levels and multiple smaller stages. Sure, yes, the fact that he's rescuing kidnapped kids has aged about as well as most BBC programming from the 1970s to the 2000s, but it is a fun game when you can get in its zone. Proof that style can really make or break a game, Comix Zone might not have been the first game to be fashioned after an actual comic book, but it felt like the first to really make the most of that constraint. Sure, the gameplay might be harder than a coffin nail, making it a bit of a chore to play sometimes, but despite being a late release for the console, Comix Zone proved that there was some genuine horsepower left under the hood. The game follows Sketch Turner, a comic book artist with a bad case of being transported into his own comic book and forced to fight weird mutant goons. The gameplay isn't that much to write home about, granted, but again, this was an utterly gorgeous Sega Genesis game, and it still looks great today. Pretty cool, all told. Back in the 1990s, brands were pretty quick to decide that their quirky little mascot should get their very own video game. We're still waiting on the Compare the Market meerkats to get their own platformer. Americans, do you know what I'm talking about there? Now, most of these brand integration video games were complete dreck, but one game that managed to be pretty good in spite of itself was Cool Spot. Based on Spot, the short-lived mascot for 7-Up, Cool Spot is a 2D platformer about Spot rescuing other Spots that have been imprisoned. Spot. That Spot struts like a cool dude the entire time, and all the levels look like a tourist holiday through West Coast America, but you know what? This is really enjoyable. It doesn't take a genius to see that Splatterhouse was inspired by horror films like Friday the 13th. Hell, Rick wearing the terror mask is about as close as you can get to a copyright-free version of Jason Voorhees, and with the popularity of horror in the 80s and 90s, it's not surprising that Splatterhouse became a favourite for the sickos out there. It's us. We're the sickos. While only Splatterhouse 2 and 3 were available on the Sega Genesis, the clear winner is Splatterhouse 3. Essentially a horror beat-em-up, Splatterhouse 3 upped the ante with non-linear exploration and multiple endings depending on your performance. Oh, and copious amounts of gratuitous violence, of course, and it's called Splatterhouse for a reason. If there was any justice in the world, we would have had way more Strider games over the years than what we've ended up with. For a game that did side-scrolling hack and slash so well, there's only been a handful of appearances for Capcom's Brilliant Ninja, 2 of which occurred on the Sega Genesis. Between them both, you could say either are among the best Sega Genesis games ever made, but let's just focus on the first one for now. Set in the future of 2048, which is depressingly pretty much like a fortnight away, the game follows Strider Hiryu as he hacks, slashes, and clambers around 5 stages that test the limits of your platforming abilities. Now, can we get a proper new one of these soon, please? Another game series that should have been given more entries, though it's more understandable why this one was taken around the back of the shed and Mercy killed, Syndicate might have been a lot of people's first foray into the genre of cyberpunk. A real-time strategy tactics game, Syndicate let you control a team of cybernetically enhanced corporate agents as they try to overthrow a country. Like most games of this era that started out live on the PC before being ported to console, Syndicate for the Genesis arguably isn't the most definitive way to play this classic. Still, this is by no means a bad port. If being an oppressive corpo douche is on your Sega Genesis wishlist, Syndicate offers everything you could ever want. We're going to say something that might be considered a bit sacrilegious, especially when talking about a Sega console, but we're going to say it anyway. As much as Space Harrier proved that pseudo 3D shoot-em-ups were a winning formula, they always looked just a little bit ugly. Yeah, something about the colour choices or the monster designs has made Space Harrier feel a bit off-putting, so instead let's focus on what's essentially the same game but nicer to look at, and that is Panorama Cotton. The third entry in the Cotton franchise, Panorama bucked the formula by focusing on levels that scrolled into the screen instead of horizontally. You dodge projectiles, shoot enemies, and look at pretty graphics. Good stuff, and you can even upgrade your weapons and cast spells. What a star. Not to be confused with the group that Buzz Lightyear reports to, Star Control is another example of a PC release that managed to squeeze onto a console cartridge. Squeeze isn't quite the proper word though, considering that Star Control was the first example of a 12 megabit cartridge on the Sega Genesis, so it's clear that Toys for Bob, yes those guys, wanted to fit as much on there as possible. A combination of strategy and one-on-one ship combat, Star Control has players pick between the two factions of the Urquan hierarchy and the Alliance of Free Stars. Each side has their own ships with their own own strengths and weaknesses, but they're pretty evenly matched, meaning you can choose whichever looks the coolest. Fine by us. One of seemingly an endless amount of examples of confusingly worded games, Wonder Boy in Monster World sounds like the first entry in the series, right? Nope, it's actually the 5th, but when it was brought over to the West from Japan, the decision was made to make it sound like the first game. More confusingly, in Japan it's called Wonder Boy 5 Monster World 3. Wonder Boy, what is the secret of your naming convention? As for the game itself, Wonder Boy in Monster World has players control Shion as he tries to save Monster World from the clutches of Biomecha. Far from just a regular platforming game, Wonder Boy in Monster World offers plenty in the way of adventure game elements, allowing you to backtrack, buy items, and even save the game. Big deal back then. One of the key selling points of the Sega Genesis was just how gorgeous the games looked, and Ranger X might just be one of the best looking games in the entire library. Just look at this footage, Corf, war, blimey, and all that. Sure, it follows the exact same formula as every other, horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up of one lone machine versus an invasion, but when it's this fun and looks this good, who cares? Instead of piloting a ship through space though, the Ranger X is a powerful exoskeleton that comes complete with a jetpack that allows for limited flight but needs recharging. Players have to manage their resources well in order to avoid getting hit by every single projectile on the planet. Ordinarily, we do try to avoid straight remakes or ports on these big old lists, but when you've got a game as good as the original Mega Man, it's hard not to recognise greatness. Originally released on the NES, the first 3 Mega Man games managed to find their way onto the Sega Genesis as Mega Man The Wily Wars, which retained the same excellent gameplay, albeit with visual and audio overhauls and some fixed glitches. Far from being just a retread of those older games though, The Wily Wars includes an unlockable epilogue that offers 3 brand new stages and the Wily Tower Challenge, which lets you choose weapons from all 3 Mega Man games to use against the mad scientist's forces. A perfect introduction to a new console audience here. Just from the name alone, you might think that Forgotten Worlds is some kind of fantasy adventure with elves, dwarves, and all that magical nonsense. It's not incorrect, considering there's an ancient god who's responsible for destroying the entire world, which they always do, these bloody ancient gods, but instead of chainmail-clad heroes doing work for a guild or whatever, you're playing as one of 2 muscle-bound super soldiers solving their problems one rifle blast at a time. An arcade port, Forgotten Worlds was considered to be pretty faithful by late 1980s standards. Sure, some animations were removed, the backgrounds changed, and 2 entire levels cut, but besides that, it is a 1-to-1 conversion. Thankfully, Forgotten Worlds is also a blast to play, ideal for anyone looking for a bit of Contra-style blasting. There are a hell of a lot of beat-em-ups and shoot-em-ups on the Genesis, so sometimes it's just nice to appreciate a proper action RPG when they come along. Landstalker, the Treasure of King Nol fits that bill to a T, offering isometric adventuring for anyone who fancies playing games with a little bit more depth than go right and fight goons. It might not be the most polished game though, but it is ambitious nonetheless. Players control an adventurer inexplicably named Nigel, who teams with a wood nymph called Friday to find the mythical lost treasure of King Nol on a faraway island. Players explore, traverse dungeons and find upgrades over the course of several hours, making for an engaging RPG experience. Sega might have found the mascot that carried them into the future fairly early into the lifespan of the Genesis, but that didn't stop the Mad Lads from trying to find another one as a backup. One that deserved perhaps a bit more love than it ultimately received was Rystar, launching late into the console's lifespan when people were more concerned about the Saturn or the PS1. Players controlled the titular sentient star, complete with Mickey Mouse gloves and the Sega Tradition sneakers, as he uses his extendable arms to climb his way through several levels. It's Bionic Commando in terms of using your arms for platforming, but with some different tricks and surprises thrown in. Underrated, underappreciated, and undermined by a terrible release date. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time might have been the biggest TMNT game of that time for the Super Nintendo, but the Genesis wasn't afraid to get in on the action as well. You just might not know as much about it because it was released under a different name, the Hyperstone Heist. Sure, the plot is a bit different, but the building blocks are the same. Konami's first ever game for the Sega Genesis, Hyperstone Heist follows the Turtles as they fight their way to Dimension X in search of Shredder, battling classic foes along the way. With gameplay and levels based on Turtles in Time, only with longer levels and more aggressive enemy AI, Hyperstone Heist is a fairly worthy dose of turtle power. Known treasure enjoyers Cultured Vultures are at it again, and while we will get into the more popular ones later, real ones know that Alien Soldier is utterly phenomenal as well. While there are some run and gun levels to blast through, the main crux of the game is the most intense boss fights you could find on the platform, testing your mettle in the way that only treasure can. Trying to encapsulate the full story and setting of Alien Soldier feels like too much to really boil down in the short entries we use for these ranking videos, so all you need to know is you're a bird person, great, and you're shooting everything that moves, great. Players pick their loadout after each death, allowing you to strategize as you progress. Also, you're a bird person with a gun. Yeah, that'll do. Motorbike racing games are often even more thrilling than normal car racing games. Something about going 150 miles per hour while hanging on to a powerful machine for dear life is always exciting, though maybe we were influenced when we were younger by games like Road Rash. Of course, Road Rash also upped the ante by having those riding the bikes beat the snot out of each other while racing, but that just made the games even more enticing. Road Rash 2 took the bike combat formula and improved it significantly, adding a 2-player versus mode allowing players to find out who rules the road. Add in the career style mode that lets you upgrade your bike as you progress through races, and Road Rash 2 remains racing royalty. Sometimes you just need a good name in order to sell something, you know, and Zombies Ate My Neighbors is about as good as it gets on that front. Who doesn't love something that sounds like your next favourite B-movie? Fortunately, Zombies Ate My Neighbors fully leans into that B-movie vibe, with you and a friend playing as teenagers trying to rescue the burbs from the clutches of the undead, and the mad scientist who unleashed them. Across the game's pretty substantial 55 levels, you'll be fighting enemies and rescuing humans in a game where you don't know what's going to happen next. It might be called Zombies Ate My Neighbors, but you really need to be worried about the 20-foot tall baby that's the boss 8 levels in. Please don't call him the boss baby though, that might make him even more powerful. Sega's premier game about hot people driving nice cars, Outrun was the belle of the arcades for the longest time, so console ports were inevitable. For a while though, said console versions like the Master System and the Game Gear couldn't match up to what the arcade machine was offering. That all changed with the release of the Genesis version of Outrun in 1991 though, giving players a near arcade perfect version of cruising through idyllic locales with your girlfriend in the passenger seat. Absolutely immaculate vibes. Instead of racing against opponents, Outrun is about racing against the clock to complete 5 routes out of a possible 15. It is a road trip game and one that's well worth taking today. A lot is made of the partnership between Disney and Capcom that led to a lot of fantastic games, but Sega weren't to be outdone. Just look at Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, which is considered by some to be one of the best Disney tie-in games of all time. On a console generation defined by some of the biggest names in platforming that are still going today, the House of Mouse held its own. On a mission to rescue a kidnapped Minnie Mouse from an evil witch, Castle of Illusion sees Mickey running and jumping through various levels in other worlds, hoping to defeat the Masters of Illusion. It's not the most innovative game ever made, but the fundamentals on offer here do make it pretty bloody fun. A lot of the criticism of video games from the 90s was that it was all just gratuitous violence, so Dynamite Headdy is different because it challenges gamers to use their head in order to solve problems. Granted, using your head in this instance means lobbing it at enemies in order to defeat them, but then we wouldn't have an overly elaborate joke with very little payoff. Another treasure whipper. Dynamite Headdy follows the puppet Headdy as he battles with the evil King Dark Demon, which he does by lobbing his head everywhere. It can damage enemies, be used to reach new areas, or even be swapped with other heads to gain new power-ups. It is a bonkers game, but that's why we love it so much. Sega's answer to Nintendo's mega hit Donkey Kong Country, Vectorman employed pre-rendered 2D sprites to emulate 3D graphics. These visuals were jaw-dropping back in 1995, helping the Genesis to remain competitive against both the SNES and Sony's PlayStation, and retain a retro charm today. Vectorman does more than just look pretty though, it's also a blast to play, thanks to the morphing abilities of its robot protagonist and its 16 highly varied secret area-filled levels. The latter gives Vectorman plenty of replay potential, and the straightforward control scheme means you'll be more than happy to give the game at least one more go-round. What's cooler than a regular knight? Well, a knight with a bloody rocket strapped to his back, that's what. Clearly, Konami agreed, as they created Rocket Knight Adventures that allows you to be a cool, honourable hero, albeit with propulsion that'd probably melt your face off the bone in real life. No one cares about physics and realism though when you're playing a game as fun as this. Players control Sparkster as they use their Rocket Knight abilities to both fight against the forces of the Devo-Tindos Empire while trying to also rescue a kidnapped princess in the process. Sure, you've got a sword to slice through people, but the real fun comes from using your rocket boosters to smash into them at high speed. Still shines pretty bright. If going through the Genesis's vast platforming library sounds like it's getting a bit too samey and you're looking for something with a bit of different kind of meat on its bones, Shining Force 2 is an RPG that should be on your radar. Considered one of the best RPGs of all time, Shining Force is, pardon the pun, a shining example of excellent gaming on the Sega Genesis. We really forced that one in. A tactical RPG, players control the titular Shining Force, a group of adventurers who must deal with the chaos that ensues after a thief accidentally unleashes an ancient demon king. You've got multiple characters, each with their own classes, and can be upgraded throughout the game, so you'll be playing this one for quite a while. If you didn't know any better, you'd think that Ghouls and Ghosts had no differences from the previous game, Ghosts and Goblins, which isn't entirely unfair. You're playing as Arthur, once again, rescuing a damsel in distress by travelling into pits of hell, and just like last time, you need to complete the game twice in order to see the true ending. This time though, you need to have a special weapon equipped when you get there. It is harder somehow, basically. Capcom didn't exactly break the mold when making a sequel to their popular dark fantasy arcade game then, but Ghouls and Ghosts did give players the ability to shoot up and down directly. More control over your character is always an improvement, making this a Genesis platforming masterclass. From one instance of platforming greatness to another, Earthworm Jim didn't have too many games, and we probably aren't seeing another one, but the legacy of those few games did leave were, well, let's just say, groovy. Another example of a game that just throws ideas and concepts at you so you're always on your toes, from a hellscape occupied only by lawyers to a bungee jumping contest against a sentient snotball. Earthworm Jim is a testament to imagination. From Jim's expressive sprite work, the beautiful and weird background, to the excellent run and gun platforming gameplay, Earthworm Jim is a Sega Genesis game that's firing on all cylinders. It's not "we'd love you if you were a worm," we love Jim because he is a worm. Blurring the lines between roguelike and platformer, ToeJam and Earl's hard-to-classify gameplay failed to attract much of an audience when it first hit shelves in 1991. Critics loved it though, and the game subsequently developed a devoted following among Sega aficionados, and it's not hard to see why either. ToeJam and Earl combines addictive mechanics and innovative two-player mode, few split-screen experiences are wilder, and above all, humour to dazzling effect. Sure, its 90s slang and garish graphics might make your child think it's a bit cringe, but you'll be having too much fun to notice much less care or feed them. You don't know what cringe is, child. Fun fact, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is a reskin version of another puzzle game, Puyo Puyo. This lack of originality, further compounded by Puyo Puyo's own indebtedness to Tetris, should make Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine an utterly forgettable affair, yet somehow the reverse is true. And somehow I said it correctly without saying Mean Bean Meme. This little banger's core falling block mechanics are as well executed as any entry in the genre, and the inclusion of a Sonic-themed story mode adds an extra dimension to proceedings. There's also a neat two-player versus mode, which gives Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine yet another edge over other, less ambitious Tetris clones, but it's more than just that too. If the previous entry on this list of the best Sega Genesis games of all time was a tad derivative, the same doesn't apply to Herzog Zwei, which is as fun to play as it is to say. Technosoft's 1989 effort is widely cited as one of the most influential real-time strategy games ever released, and is credited with inspiring RTS classics such as Doom 2, StarCraft, and Command & Conquer. Fittingly, what made Herzog Zwei such a big deal back in the day is also what makes it so fun to play even now. It has a streamlined command system, a gamepad-friendly icon-driven interface, and relatively fast-paced tactical gameplay that's just as satisfying on your own or with a friend. Konami developed Castlevania Bloodlines specifically with the Sega Genesis in mind, so while this spin-off follows the same basic platformer template as other early entries in the vampire-themed Castlevania franchise, it also caters to Genesis owners' love of fast-paced beat-em-ups. The upshot of this is that Castlevania Bloodlines' gameplay has a flavour all its own, while the inclusion of player character-specific branching pathways bolsters its replay value. Castlevania Bloodlines graphics are also up there with the best the Genesis has to offer. Another benefit of Konami playing to the strengths and weaknesses of the console from the get-go. Another run-and-gun shooter, Gunstar Heroes is an uninterrupted thrill ride from the moment players press start. This is true regardless of whether you tackle the game's 7 stages alone or in 2-player co-op, collecting and combining weapons as you go. It's also a bloody lovely looker too. Part of what keeps Gunstar Heroes' gameplay feeling fresh is this customization element, and the consistently inventive level design does the rest. Gunstar Heroes just feels great to play too, thanks to developer Treasure's ingenious workarounds for the Genesis' various limitations, and I'm sick of axing for another game. The 16-bit era was the heyday of the side-scrolling hack-and-slash game, which explains why the genre is so well represented on this list that celebrates the biggest hitters on Genesis. One of the very best is Golden Axe, Sega's 1989 arcade port that takes its cues from the sword and sorcery movies popular at the time. The close quarters combat is suitably meaty, and the inclusion of distinct playable characters and rideable creatures staves off some monotony. One of my fondest ever memories is clambering on that pink chicken thing. Plus, the Sega Genesis version of Golden Axe features an extra stage, complete with a new and impressively tough final boss. Did anyone even get there when they were young though? It was pretty hard stuff. But it was absolute baby stuff compared to this one. Contra Hardcore is the first entry in Konami's run-gun franchise to grace a Sega platform, and it proves the maxim that some things are worth waiting for. The game sports several features missing from earlier Contra outings, including 4 player characters to choose from, a cutscene-driven story, and branching level design. Contra Hardcore bundles these innovations with the same intense, to put it lightly, gameplay that made its predecessors so great, blending 8-directional shooting with a new slide attack. The result is one of the greatest, not to mention hardest, run-and-gun games of the 4th generation, or well, of any generation really. Ecco the Dolphin is hands down the most visually impressive game on this list of the best Sega Genesis games. It's also the most calming. Whether you're solving puzzles with Ecco's dolphin song or ramming enemies with his nose, there is something zen-like about gliding through the game's virtual ocean. This is all the more remarkable given Ecco the Dolphin isn't an easy game, in part because, like a real-life aquatic mammal, Ecco needs to periodically surface for air. Rather than harshing Ecco the Dolphin's mellow vibes, well, right up until it becomes a horror game, the game's difficulty curve further enhances the overall experience and explains why many fans are eager for Sega to revive the franchise. But if there's one game that might benefit from yellow paint everywhere, it could be this one. A shoot-'em-up with a tactical edge, Desert Strike Return to the Gulf drops players into the cockpit of an AH-64 Apache helicopter. The overall aim is to bring down the regime of a crazed dictator. However, there is more to Desert Strike Return to the Gulf's gameplay than jumping in your chopper and blowing up the bad dudes. To win, you'll need to engage your brain as often as your trigger finger by managing your ammo and fuel levels and even choosing the right co-pilot for the mission at hand. These elements make Desert Strike Return to the Gulf one of the deeper, more strategic shoot-'em-ups, and also one of the best. If you haven't played it yet, it really should be your jam. Really not that many sports games from the 4th generation or video game consoles still hold up today. With a lot of them, there's just isn't a lot of meat on the bone, you know, but also at least they aren't full of gambling, right? NBA Jam Tournament Edition is something entirely different simply because it doesn't really try to ape real basketball. Instead, NBA Jam TE emphasizes superhuman slam dunks and blatant fouls over realism and rules, and is just much more enjoyable for it. Lightning quick hoops aside, the game is also brimming with secret characters and Easter eggs to unlock, boosting its overall replayability, but even now you'll get a lot of fun out of this one. Boom shaka, and may I also offer lacquer. Shadowrun is one of the most grown-up Genesis titles on this list and underscores how well the console catered to older gamers. A cyberpunk-themed action RPG, Shadowrun faithfully recreates the complex mythology and dark tone of the pen-and-paper role-playing game it's based on. The story is compelling and full of dogs, the top-down exploration and combat are equally worthwhile, and the character customization options are suitably granular. Shadowrun also includes special stages set inside a vast computer network that provides a welcome break from its core gameplay loop. Shadowrun gives a real air of freedom unlike much else at the time, and the fact that an RPG like this debuted on console over PC is still absolutely wild. Also, given the pretty naff name of the story of Thor here in the land of the never rising sun, Beyond Oasis did a more than decent job of filling the console's Legend of Zelda gap. Heck, Agent's 1994 action-adventure game even brings some new ideas to the table. Combat is far more physical than what you typically find in Zelda. Instead of simply tapping the attack button, players can chain together swords, swings, kicks, and throws, giving battles a slightly more arcade-like feel. The game also spices up its hack-and-slash action with magic-powered abilities tied to elemental spirits. By summoning characters like the Water Spirit Ditto or the Fire Spirit Ifrit, players gain new attacks and puzzle-solving tools that help open up the game's dungeon. It's also a total looker. US Gold billed Flashback: The Quest for Identity as a CD-ROM in cartridge back in 1992, and if that was overselling this sci-fi game a tad, it wasn't too far off the money either. Developer Delphine Software International, who I heard went into the bathwater business after going bust, brought Flashback's Conrad and his alien enemies to life via rotoscoping, resulting in the most fluid animations possible with 16-bit technology. This heightened sense of realism, coupled with the game's intense platformer action and cinematic storytelling sensibilities, made Flashback: The Quest for Identity one of the most immersive titles in the Genesis' vast, brilliant library. And somehow every Flashback since this one has pretty much been a bit Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master isn't just one of the best Sega Genesis games of all time, it's also one of the best ninja games of all time too. Eschewing the punishing difficulty of its 1989 predecessor, The Revenge of Shinobi, this hack and slash and platformer hybrid expands the number of attacks at protagonist Joe Masashi's disposal. This means more fun for players, as does the sequel's faster paced gameplay. Shinobi 3 even features special stages with Joe on either horseback or motorized surfboard that encapsulates the franchise's welcome pivot to more up-tempo level design, and if you haven't played The Art of Vengeance yet, you really should. Mortal Kombat 2 is so much better than the original Mortal Kombat that it's almost embarrassing. The second entry in the Mortal Kombat franchise retains the graphic violence that made its predecessor such a phenomenon, only this time it's paired with more robust fighting game mechanics. As sequels go, you could say it's a flawless victory. Mortal Kombat 2's graphics and audio have both undergone a noticeable upgrade as well, lending the game a more atmospheric edge that does love a bit of a bucket of blood here and there as well. True, it does lack the depth or audio-visual polish of its successor, but its superior roster of fighters and more accessible mechanics trump these superficial improvements, and you can still pick this up and play with a friend and have a wonderful time. Phantasy Star for the End of the Millennium was the final installment in the original non-online franchise, and it sure did end things on a high note. Quick question though, where were you at the end of the millennium? Let me know down below. The team at Sega outdid themselves with the fourth Phantasy Star game, adding new wrinkles to the turn-based combat system and beefing up the storytelling with manga-inspired cutscenes. Phantasy Star 4 also included some welcome updates to the exploration aspect of the franchise's established formula. Now players could interact with background items, making the Algol star system feel more alive than ever before. JRPGs really came into their own during the 16-bit era, and Phantasy Star 4 was at the forefront of this revolution. Mortal Kombat devotees are probably howling right now, but let's be real, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition deserves to rank higher on this list of the best Sega Genesis games. As good as Mortal Kombat 2 is, it does come up short compared to Street Fighter 2 Dash in every way that matters. Street Fighter 2 Dash's mechanics are deeper, its animations more fluid, and its roster better balanced and more varied. The Special Champion Edition builds on these strengths by making the original game's 4 boss characters playable, proving it's possible to improve on perfection, and that fighting games have always innovated on re-releasing games 18 times. No wonder the streets are still playing it today. While there's something to recommend about every entry in the Streets of Rage franchise, for our money, the best of the bunch is Streets of Rage 2. A side-scrolling beat-em-up, it improves on the core mechanics established by its predecessor by adding more distinctly different playable characters and broadening the moveset at the player's disposal. The graphics are sharper as well, and composer Yuzo Koshiro's techno soundtrack, with contributions by Motohiro Kawashima, straight up slaps. Subsequent Streets of Rage installments are essentially riffs on Streets of Rage 2, yet rarely reach the same heights as this absolute 16-bit icon that will still steal your afternoon even today. But the best Sega Genesis game of all time is, of course, nah, only joking, it is obviously Did any of you guys not see this one coming? About as predictable as the ending of Titanic, but still. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is arguably the platonic ideal of what a Sonic game should be. All the core components of the franchise, the frenetic platformer gameplay, bright graphics, and smart level design are present and accounted for here, and polished to the nth degree. Yet Sonic the Hedgehog 3 does more than just iterate, it innovates too. There's a greater emphasis on exploration and non-linear gameplay in this third installment, and to Sega's credits, these additions gel well with the franchise's speed-orientated formula. Honestly, we only have one complaint about Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and it's that it's best enjoyed in tandem with Sonic & Knuckles. But really, who ever complained about having too many Sonic games on their shelf? Unless it's like, 10 copies of Sonic Forces, in which case, go to the hospital. And that was our list looking at the 50 best Sega Genesis or Sega Mega Drive games of all time. Was anything too high? Was anything too low? Was anything missing? Be sure to let me know down below. And hey, if you like what we do, you can become a member and get early access to all our videos for just £1 or freedom buck a month. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and I'll catch you when I catch you.